welcome to my channel. My name is Jessica, and today we will be covering the true crime case of Diane and Rachel Staudte. Like mother, like daughter is a popular quote, especially when the daughter is a spitting image of their mother, and this case is no different. However, everything came crashing down on this mother-daughter duo when a pastor called about 2 deaths and 1 illness, all within the same family, in just over a year. I do true crime videos on Tuesdays, and on Saturdays I do videos on a deeper look into crime, which are on topics that revolve either around crime or death. This video is for educational purposes only. I am not an expert. I have just researched this topic and pulled information together to make this video. I would also like to add a trigger warning here. We will be talking for the majority of the video about poisonings, but we will also be talking about, briefly, someone having self-unaliving thoughts. If any of that is too much for you, I completely understand. But without further ado, let's get into it. The Staudte family was composed of mother and father Diane and Mark Staudte, and they got married in December of 1985, and together they had 4 children: Sean, Sarah, Rachel, and Brianna. Diane and Mark met while attending St. John's College in Winfield, Kansas, and after they graduated, they moved into a quaint home at 2444 West Page Street in Springfield, Missouri. Diane became a nurse and later a clinical supervisor at United Healthcare, and she also played the organ at their Redeemer Lutheran Church on the side. Mark was the lead singer and guitarist in his local blues band called Messing with Destiny, and he also bartended on the side sometimes, but mostly stuck with the band life. However, being a musician doesn't always come with a steady flow of money, so Diane was the breadwinner for her family. So with 1 main income and 4 kids, things got pretty expensive, so they definitely struggled throughout the years. When the kids were younger, Diane called her kids little professors, saying, quote, "Little geniuses, they all had their little interests, but boy, they knew everything about their special interests." As the kids got older, the 3rd-born Rachel was seen as the golden child because she was good at everything she did. Rachel did great in school. She played the flute, she wrote poetry, and she was an avid artist that posted her artwork online. Diane would regularly post about Rachel on her Facebook, but none of her other kids, with the exception of her oldest daughter, Sarah, when she graduated college from Missouri State University, where she studied French and history. The oldest child, Sean, had autism and suffered from seizures, and he needed home care from the family. Their youngest daughter, Brianna, had some learning disabilities, but she didn't let that stop her from doing really good in school. All in all, the family was normal and happy. At least, that's what everyone thought. On Easter Sunday of 2012, the father, Mark, died at the age of 61. He didn't have a history of seizures, but Diane said that he had multiple that day, and the last one was 45 minutes before she went back to check on him and found him dead. When she called 911, they asked why she didn't call sooner, so that way they could get him to the hospital, but Diane said that Mark didn't want to go to the hospital, probably because they were pretty religious and it was Easter. His death was declared as a stroke from natural causes due to pre-existing health issues that he already had. There were no injuries to his body and everything appeared normal except for a ring around his mouth of blood. His bandmates said that Mark was off when they were practicing 2 days earlier, that he was slurring his speech and his skin had a yellowish tint to it. Their pastor, however, said that it was unusual because the last time the pastor saw Mark seemed perfectly fine. And Mark and the pastor were relatively close. They would meet up once a month and have lunch and just catch up. But sometimes I guess that's how it goes. People do die out of nowhere sometimes. They had Mark's body cremated and held a funeral shortly after. Diane, of course, held the funeral, and she kind of made it more like a party instead of a funeral. And yeah, sometimes people like to make things less heavy and make it more of a celebration of life. But again, the pastor found it weird. When Mark's life insurance money came in, Diane used it to buy a bigger home for her and her kids. Not only was it a bigger home, but it was also in a better neighborhood, and this made her children happy, at least as happy as they could be right now. Everything seemed to be going well. The family moved into their nicer, bigger house, and everyone seemed to be getting back into their normal lives relatively quickly. But on September 2nd that same year, another call to 911 was made, and this time it was regarding their son, Sean. On the 911 call, Diane said that she last spoke to her son the night before and that he hasn't been feeling well for the last 3 or 4 weeks. He's had a lot of flu-like symptoms. This includes headaches, body pain, nausea, and diarrhea, and Diane even brought him to the doctors because he was having a really hard time staying hydrated. She said that she checked on him multiple times that night and went to church the next morning, and when she returned, she again went to go check on him, and she found him on the floor, curled up with a blanket partially covering him. She went up to him right away to check for a pulse, and there was none, so she immediately called 911. Sean died at the age of 26, and it was only 5 months after his father. Upon inspecting the body, there were no visible injuries, but there was a dried ring of blood around his mouth, just like his father. The Greene County Medical Examiner determined that the death was due to pre-existing health issues, like his seizure disorder, and ruled that it was based on natural causes, just like his father. This time, though, they didn't hold a funeral for Sean, and some found that really weird, but others just pinned it on the fact that the family was probably grieving and it was just too much for them since the father just died 5 months ago and now they lost Sean too. Most people felt really bad for the Staudte family and their seemingly awful luck, but their bad luck doesn't stop here. In June the following year, the oldest daughter, Sarah, was rushed to Cox South Hospital by her mom and sister, Rachel. And Sarah was so sick that she couldn't even wake up, so her mom and sister had to carry her into the car and into the hospital. She was immediately admitted into the ICU for a brain bleed and organ failure. The doctors ran a ton of tests, but they couldn't figure out what was causing these symptoms. But when word got out that Sarah was in the hospital, the Springfield police got an anonymous phone call. The caller basically said that he was a pastor and that there was a family that experienced 2 deaths recently that attended his church. He said that there seemed to be more to these deaths than just being natural causes, and also told the police that now that Sarah is in the hospital, that there may be foul play involved. He also told police that he thinks that an investigation would be beneficial, and he even brought up the funerals from Mark and how Diane was acting really weird and how there wasn't even a funeral for Sean. At the end of the phone call, he said that he believed that Sarah's death was imminent, and because of this, the police rushed to the hospital. First, they talked to the nurses that were taking care of Sarah, and they said that Diane's behaviors were pretty strange. They said that she didn't visit often, but when she did, she would often laugh, joke, and talk about her upcoming trip to Florida. They also said that Diane showed little concern for her daughter's health and that when she was there, she was void of any emotion. When they talked to the doctors said that they believed that Sarah was suffering from slow poisoning, even though nothing showed on the toxicology report. The doctor said that it aligned with the brain bleed, liver, and kidney failure. The police and the doctors decided that they wanted to have another toxicology report done at a larger facility, that way they could examine it for more things. And on top of that, they wanted to take samples from Sean and Mark too. And they had enough samples from Sean, but they didn't take enough samples from Mark to be able to examine those as well. And I didn't see why that was, that they didn't have samples for Mark. Maybe because it wasn't suspicious, it was the first death that was occurring within that family, and it was ruled as natural causes. And on top of that, Sean and Mark's bodies were both cremated, so exhuming the bodies was out of the question. While this investigation was being done and they were waiting for results on the new toxicology report, Sarah started recovering. Unfortunately, though, she would never go back to the way she was before. Sarah sustained permanent neurological damage and is now living in assisted living because of it. After talking to the hospital staff, Springfield police called Diane and asked if she would come in for an informal interview. That way they could talk about everything that's been going on. She said yes, and Detective Neil McAmis did the interview, and he remained calm and measured the entire time. I left the links for these interviews in the description box down below if any of you are interested in seeing that as well. McAmis started the interview by asking Diane what she thought was causing Sarah to get so sick and why all of these deaths were happening. And all Diane could say was that she had no idea what was going on. Eventually, after not really getting anywhere in the interview, McAmis brought up the idea of poisoning, and if it was poisoning, what Diane thought that Sarah could have taken. Diane said that Sarah did have unaliving thoughts, but that was a long time ago, and that Sarah didn't seem to be depressed like that now. Diane then mentioned that Sarah just recently graduated from college, but was having a hard time finding a job, and that Sarah really wasn't putting in the effort that Diane would have hoped for. Still not really getting anywhere, McAmis brought up poisoning again, and this time he asked Diane, what exactly do you think Sarah took? And Diane said, probably cleaning supplies, because that's all we have in the house. He then asked Diane what she did with the life insurance money, thinking maybe there was a motive there. And Diane said that she used Mark's life insurance money to buy a bigger house in a better neighborhood for her and her kids. She also said that she didn't do anything with Sean's life insurance money, that it's still sitting in the bank, and that if anything, she'll probably just use it on bills. So that kind of gets rid of the motive for money there. And he asked because money is a huge motive for things like this. And Mark had a $20,000 life insurance policy, and the kids all had $15,000 ones. When he wasn't getting the information he wanted, he began to mention that sometimes people hurt others in their lives when those other people do bad things, and segued the conversation into being about Mark. When the conversation changed to be about Mark, Diane started talking about how he suffered from substance issues and that he had some pretty bad friends, so it wasn't really surprising that maybe someone wanted him hurt. But not her kids. She just couldn't imagine that. Then she also said that it wasn't surprising that he died because of his substance issues, how much he drank, and his pre-existing health issues. Then she started talking about their relationship, and she said that they did not have a good marriage and that she's been trying to kick him out of the house for a long time now. Although she wanted him out of the house, she didn't want to kick him out because she was afraid that he would try to unalive himself, but she did mention how much she hated his guts. Then the detective mentioned Sean, and she said that he suffered from autism and had a seizure disorder and that he was, quote, a significant burden, was always interfering, and was worse than a pest. She also mentioned how Sarah and Sean would often argue and trash the house, and now things are starting to make sense, so the detective keeps pushing. Now that she's starting to loosen up, the detective mentions that Sarah is now undergoing more tests, and they're going to be more thorough this time. And after a little while later, she mentions how Sarah is a difficult child, and now that she graduated from college, she needs a job to help pay for those college bills because Diane did not want to. While talking about the bills too, Diane also said, quote, after a while you get tired of doing everything for your kids. Then Diane acknowledged that she should have taken Sarah to the hospital sooner and that she wouldn't do anything to hurt her kids. And now that she's really loosening up, the detective knew that she was about to crack. And she did. She admitted that she knew that Mark, Sean, and Sarah were drinking antifreeze and that she was so mad at them for doing it. Then the detective said my favorite thing in the whole investigation. He said, quote, Diane, you knew they were drinking antifreeze. You knew they didn't. Bravo. Yes. And that was it. She confessed. She said that she had been giving them antifreeze from anywhere from a few days to a few weeks before they succumbed to the poisoning. She said that she put it in Mark's Gatorade and that she would put it in the kids' sodas, usually their Coca-Colas. At the end of the interview, she said, quote, I've screwed up everybody. I've screwed up my whole family. It was at this point she knew that she was caught and was then taken into custody. Later, though, she redacted her statement and said that it was a false confession and that they forced it out of her, even though we all know now that's not true. They also brought in Rachel, the star child, for an interview, and she was interviewed by a different detective, and it started the exact same way. He mentioned how Sarah was in the hospital but was getting better, and he also brought up the deaths of her father and her brother. And Rachel didn't really give any information. She really seemed like she just had no idea what was happening. During the interview, Rachel didn't really show any emotions, which I thought was weird considering the last year that she went through. And now her sister being sick, I mean, I would expect her to be a complete mess. She did talk about, though, how her parents would fight often, but it was nothing crazy, and that her father was a big drinker. She also mentioned that her and her mom were trying to get Sean into an assisted living home because they had to take care of him. But at the same time, she said that he was really low maintenance, which is really the opposite of what her mother said. Then he asked about Sarah, and Rachel said that her and her mom would take care of Sarah while she was sick, and when she got really bad, they brought her to the hospital. He wanted to know if Rachel thought that it was a genetic issue or if it was just some bad luck that their family was experiencing, but Rachel said that she tries not to talk about it and was pretty much just dodging the conversation and acting really naive. At the time, Rachel was 22, but she was acting like she had the understanding of a 15-year-old, just not really understanding what was happening and not trying to look deeper into the issue. So the detective finally realized that it was time to mention that her mom admitted to the murders, that she admitted to poisoning her dad, brother, and sister. And Rachel started crying immediately, and she continued crying for the rest of the interview. But were these tears real? Well, the detective asked her if she ever thought that her mother would be capable of poisoning her family, and she said no. She said that that thought had never crossed her mind. And of course, Rachel said that she wasn't involved at all. But while they were questioning Rachel, they actually got a search warrant for the Staudte home. They found a purple journal that was dated back to June of 2011, and it was Rachel's. The most significant entry was from a year before Mark's death, and it said, quote, "It's sad when I realize how my father will pass on in the next few months. Sean will move on shortly after. It will be tough getting used to these changes, but everything will work out." Once they got this, Rachel was arrested and interrogated again later on. Once they told Rachel about the diary, she tried to explain it away by saying it was from her dreams and writing about it was a way to express herself. However, the investigator wasn't buying it, and she knew that it was time to confess, and that's exactly what she did. She told them that she helped her mom poison her dad, brother, and sister. and not only was she a part of it, but she was a willing participant in it as well. She also told them that they researched different methods on how to do this. They said that they looked at strangulation as well as putting poisonous plants in their food, but they decided on antifreeze when they read online that they could buy the type of antifreeze that didn't have the additive to give it its taste and smell. And with Diane's nursing background, she knew that the main ingredient wouldn't be found on a regular toxicology report because it is so rarely used. She said that she agreed to killing her father, but had reservations on killing her brother and sister. However, obviously that didn't stop her. They asked what her motive was, and she said, quote, "As far as Dad, it was for a little peace. Sean, because he was annoying and worse than a pest, and Sarah was just nosy, very nosy." She also said that they took Sarah to the hospital because, I'm going to read this one because it's pretty long. Quote, "Houses are nasty after someone dies in it. I get a lot of nightmares. After Sean died, I moved into his room and it was awful, awful, awful in there. I kept feeling things in there. I just didn't want that again." End quote. After that, she was asked how she felt that Sarah didn't die, and she said that she was shocked. Her and her mom even talked about it before bringing her to the hospital about what they thought the likelihood was that Sarah would survive. She said that they never anticipated Sarah surviving, and she also said that they never thought that they were going to get caught, which she acknowledged was pretty stupid of her to think. At the end of the interview, Rachel also said that they were planning on killing her 9-year-old sister Brianna, and that was because they wanted it to be just them. Rachel and Diane genuinely felt that they were the only ones who could understand each other. Upon arrest, they were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault. By the time they were both arrested and taken into custody, the new toxicology report came back from Sean and Sarah, and it showed that both of them had ethylene glycol in their systems, which is one of the raw components of antifreeze. And this substance has to be specifically tested for. It doesn't just show up on any toxicology report, which is why the Greene County Medical Examiner missed it. According to the U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, symptoms are subtle within the first 12 hours of ingestion, usually making the person feel drunk. With it, the central nervous system gets slowed down, and the symptoms often mimic other common health issues. So, with this poisoning being so rare and difficult to detect, it explains how Diane and Rachel got away with it for so long. After both Diane and Rachel were arrested, the youngest sister, Brianna, was placed in foster care. This case was all over the media, and it attracted national attention because of the unique way they killed their victims, as well as the fact that it was familicide, the reason behind it, and the fact that they almost got away with it for so long. In May of 2015, Rachel pled guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder in exchange for her testimony against her mom if she decided to go to trial. Rachel was sentenced to life terms plus 20 years and is eligible for parole after 42.5 years. In January of 2016, Diane took an Alfred plea, which is where she acknowledges that the prosecution had enough to convict her of her charges, but in doing this, she doesn't have to admit to the guilt. In doing this, she agreed to serve 3 life sentences concurrently, and those sentences are 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 1 count of first-degree assault, one of which of those charges make her ineligible for parole, so she will be in jail the rest of her life. Rachel's sentence was finalized in March of 2016, and Diane's was finalized in 2018. Diane and Rachel are now serving their time in separate prisons, and when Rachel had a chance to speak at the end of her trial, she said that her sister Sarah was her inspiration. She said, quote, "What's really amazing is that despite the bad, there are those who forgive. Thank you for showing me what I can be." When she said it through tears, and she also said that she was sorry for participating in her mother's murder plot and that she did it because she was scared. But she also said that being scared is no excuse, which is true. It is no excuse. At the end of Diane's sentencing, she said, quote, "I'm not a perpetual killer. I'm just stupid. I regret doing it. I really do. I've screwed up everybody. I've screwed up my whole family." After both the trials were over, Sarah spoke in her first and only exclusive interview to ABC News. She said, quote, "I prefer to be a survivor than a victim. I forgive my mom for what she did to me. Not only took away my dad and brother, but she took away my livelihood and independence." After the sentencing, Sarah said that she was relieved, and she also said that she chose to forgive her mom and sister because that's the Christian thing to do, and she believed that forgiveness was the only way to go. Shortly after Rachel's sentencing, she filed a motion to correct her sentencing because she said she had a fear of men and was intimidated by her attorneys and the police investigators. She said that this fear led to miscommunication, but her motion never received any traction, and she is going to be serving the rest of her sentence. Lastly, before we finish this video, Diane actually did an interview that came out this year from 2020, and it was a massive turn from her last statement in court. They asked her what she would say to Sarah, and she said, quote, "I'm sorry for what she went through, but you know, I'm sorry for what everybody goes through. I'm sorry for what I had to go through." Really, Diane? In this interview as well, she also mentioned how she too could have possibly been poisoned because her husband hung around dangerous people, even though she never mentioned before at any point in this case that she thought that she was also poisoned. Also, on top of that, there's no proof that anyone else was connected in this whole entire case other than Diane and Rachel. It just goes to show that Diane isn't taking any account for what she did, and that she really has no remorse for what she did to her husband, her son, and her daughter. And since I always like to end the video on some kind of interesting note, this is also the time that the unknown caller showed himself. And I'm sure, as we all knew, it was their pastor, Jeff Sippy. He also spoke in this interview, as well as the two main detectives on this case. Well, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you liked it, please consider liking my video or maybe even subscribing. And if there are any cases that you would like me to cover, please put them in the comments down below. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye. Imminent? Imminent. Hurt. You gotta be fucking kidding me. Okay, whatever, I said it good the first time.